Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at this particular orchid, and I've also included its parentage at the bottom of the video here. I'm not gonna say it because I know I'm just gonna totally butcher the names. But here you go. This orchid also has a nickname called the Yellow Mini Mark, probably for its orange lip as well as the tiny little spots or freckles on the petals and sepals. But let's go back in time and see how this orchid performed for just over a year and a half under my care. So going back in 2018, yes, 2018 September, gosh, because this orchid is a sequential bloomer, and every time it would bloom it would give me 1 to 2 flowers, even though it had 2 spikes. But every time it's just 1 or 2 flowers, so I didn't think it was enough material for me to tell a story, to give you a good video. So I waited and waited, and before I knew it, a year had gone by, and this folder just had the folder I created for this orchid just had a bunch of photos from different blooming cycles. So this video really is a compilation, and I apologize, you know, it seems that I'm showing you old material from all the way from 2018, but the main reason is because this orchid is a sequential bloomer, and every time it will only give me 1 or 2 flowers, so I waited. But here you go, you would have a sort of a year review on this orchid, and I hope that's okay with you. So this orchid was purchased somewhere in September or end of August 2018. It came with 2 flower spikes. One was very, very long, the one that you're seeing right now. And then it also has another spike on the right, which was a lot shorter. When I first got it, it was just flower spikes, and then pretty soon it started to produce buds, which I was super happy about. And then I started to detect a bit of fragrance coming from the flowers. It was a very faint fragrance. It was not strong by all means, but I could smell something, and I think that fragrance probably comes from the tetraspis parentage in it. The first parent is probably a cross between low BI and tetraspis, and I think that fragrance kind of come from tetraspis. That's my guess. It has relatively good root system, and I put this orchid into a 16-ounce cup because at the time it was in spike and it was about to produce buds, so I didn't want to repot the orchid right away. So I had to find a way to I guess semi-quarantine this orchid. So I put it into this cup, as well as kind of separate it from the rest of my collection for quite some time before I was confident that this orchid is disease-free, pest-free. I mean, you know, I can only take my best guess based on what I see and how I feel about this orchid. So after about, I think, 2 months, I decided that it was safe enough for me to include this orchid in my overall collection in terms of location in my old environment. Another benefit of using that cup is I typically only give this orchid about 1/4 cup of water, sometimes 1/8 of a cup, depending on the weather and humidity that I see. So that cup also serves as a saucer, if you will. So it does give me quite a bit of flexibility having that cup. You know, I can kind of semi-quarantine this orchid so that even if there is bug inside the cup, it won't immediately have a lot of access to go directly next to or onto the plant next to this orchid, so to speak. And because this orchid is a sequential bloomer, so I do have to, I guess, put in a reminder here for those of you who are new to this orchid hobby. Sequential bloomer orchids, if their spikes are green, do not cut them just because there is no flower. They may potentially grow longer to give you more buds. The number of buds or flowers that will come sequentially may depend on the type of orchid. But if they're a sequential bloomer, don't cut it because the spikes may give you more flowers. Even if they're not sequential bloomer, if you keep the green spike going, sometimes at the nodes area, they may continue to grow out secondary spike or even give you a keiki. So try to keep green spike around for whenever possible and for as long as possible, and I personally will only cut a spike off when it's completely dried or is entirely yellow. And here I'm gonna use this opportunity to answer a couple questions. And one of the questions I get from time to time is people will be wondering and ask me if it is okay to continue to provide fertilizer when orchids are in flower. And my answer is it depends on what kind of fertilizer you give to that particular orchid. And for me personally, if my orchids are in flower, in general, at least for most of my orchids, I do not fertilize them because I'm within the school of thought where I believe if you don't do it correctly, you may potentially shorten the blooming cycle. I know sometimes people want to provide fertilizer just so that they can maybe extend the blooming cycle. But I have done this to some of my orchids as an experiment for just about a year, and I don't see any significant result. So I think I may have to continue to do that experiment for the same orchids that already was receiving fertilizer when they were in flower. Continue to do that for another year, maybe another 2 years, to be able to really see the difference, if there is any. And also another recommendation that I received from a couple of my friends who are much more experienced than I am, as well as a recommendation from one of the subscribers on my channel. They all say if you want to do fertilizer when orchids are in flower, try to use a balanced fertilizer. So that means for the NPK numbers, they're exactly the same, right? And I think the brand that I have seen online, I think it's called Grow More. I think this is not a sponsored video or anything, but I think that brand is called Grow More. And I think that one is a yellow fertilizer, and the number is 20-20-20, so 3 20s. So you might want to give that a try. I think I have it somewhere, and that's what I was using, but I have to find it where I put it now, because I only used it on a couple orchids, and like I said, I did not see a significant improvement or extension of the blooming cycle. So that is yet to be determined, at least based on the orchids that I use and based on my environment. But just something that I want to throw out there to answer that question. You could, but you have to know what you're doing, or you have to be brave enough for an experiment. So if it's an experiment for you and you don't know for sure you know what you're doing, then I would choose a orchid that is slightly on the cheaper side, or some kind of common orchid that you can easily replace if you somehow damage the orchid or somehow killed it or burn its roots, whatnot. So when you're doing experiments, just choose a common cheap orchid, so that way you can sleep at night if something goes wrong. Another thing about this orchid is I did not repot this orchid right away because it was in spike, in flower. And sometimes I know some people, they really like to repot their orchids as soon as they get them home. I personally don't do that because I feel that I may potentially set back the orchid more. So essentially, I don't want to do more harm than good. So after the 2 flower spike completely finished blooming, died off, brown, I cut them off. I gave this orchid a repot sometime in the summertime of 2019, and I went with a moss no drainage hole method, and toward the end of November 2019 it started to put out a new spike. So obviously this orchid likes what I did to it, and so in the near future I'm hoping that I will be able to show you more bloom video of this particular orchid. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!